News go, news Ghana. Wahala no dey done na the world. I say, well, this na two salon woman there. We go for go work na Oman, one of the richest Arab countries there. We see them picture on social media where we say they are lesbians then and they end up married to themselves. As we dey see from the picture, then they kiss better one. Wahala no dey done.
No, they don't. Welcome, guys, to Exposing Sierra Leone. Today's topic is no gay marriage. Sierra Leone government condemns same-sex relationships in Sierra Leone. Before we get into it, let's do a quick overview and some introductions. But let's do the overview first. So, just a really high-level view of what's happening here. There was a recent stance by the Sierra Leone government against same-sex marriage. On July 12th, 2024, the Speaker of Sierra Leone's parliament, the Honorable Segepoh Solomon Thomas, made a clear statement that anyone engaged in same-sex marriage would face legal consequences, aligning with the country's long-standing laws against same-sex sexual activities, particularly between men. That's an important distinction. We'll talk about that in a second. This stance is deeply rooted in the nation's cultural and religious beliefs, which have historically influenced the legal landscape. Despite international calls for the protection of LGBTQ plus rights, including a notable statement in the UN Human Rights Council in 2011, the recent parliamentary remarks signal a potential intensification of the government's hardline position. So today we will delve into this complex issue, exploring the legal restrictions, social impacts, and ongoing, what some people would say, challenges faced by LGBTQ plus individuals in Sierra Leone. So tune in as we talk about the steps and this topic. So before we get into it, let's start with introductions. The two Sierra Leoneans on the line. Of course, I always rep for Salon Kizia. I always rep for Salon every day. Every day. So there we go. So I'll let you do your introduction first, and then I'll do my introduction following.
Okay, hey guys, thank you all for tuning in. My name is Admire, and I'm the founder of the Sierra Leoneans Killing It page, where we promote Sierra Leoneans who are killing it positively in our community. I'm also a licensed braider based in Houston, Texas. So if you live in Houston and you need your hair braided, book with me. And yeah.
Nice. And my name is Joe Hatagwa. I am American-born Sierra Leonean. Platform called Authentic African. It's all about Pan-African news, culture, history, and politics. We talk about everything pertaining to Africa and the diaspora and folks of African descent. So my goal is to bridge the gap between the two. I also help consult folks who are planning to move, visit, and or buy property on the continent of Africa. So that is what I do outside of the fact that I have a day job of advertising on connected TVs. So that is a little bit about me. Now to the story. So as you guys heard earlier, the headline story was the fact that the Sierra Leone government did condemn gay marriage. And so there's a lot to talk about here. We're first going to go over what that actually meant and then the laws that are on the books. We'll give our thoughts, and then of course we're going to open it up to you all to give your thoughts and let us know what you think, and hear from you all. So there's a couple of folks. It looks like Eight Franks says good. Guillermo's here, says hello. Can you guys also, while we get started here and as we allow people to get on, can you let us know if you can hear us, number one, and where you're watching from? We want to know where you guys are watching from and if you can hear
Mhm.
us. We want to get an idea of our Sierra Leoneans around the world, where you guys are. Um, all right, so as we allow people to do that, let's do a little bit of a deep dive into the story, right? Because this was one that popped up last week. It showed up in my feed. AYV News reported on it. And so I took a deeper look into it, and I wanted to check to see what it actually meant, right? There's a couple of countries in Africa that have gone through something similar. Uganda has done this. Um, Ghana has also recently enacted some laws. And so, it it is an important topic to talk about, and there are different people on all different sides of this, and so we wanted to talk about it. Roman says you can hear us. Mics and cams are good. Tuning in from Austin, Texas. Nice. Cash says hi. I'm not
I'm
from
from
Salem. We're
Salem, but
watching from
watching from
Dallas.
Dallas. Hey, Cash.
What's up, Cash? Cash is a consistent viewer of this live, so shout out to Cash. Okay, cool. So let me just get right into the story then, right? We might as well get right into it. This is what you guys came here for, right? So, so based on the recent developments, the Sierra Leone government, as I said, took a strong stance on same-sex marriage. So as I mentioned, it was on the 12th of July where the Speaker of Sierra Leone's parliament actually made a statement. Anyone caught in same-sex marriage will be dealt with according to law. So that statement was part of a broader condemnation of same-sex marriage by the Sierra Leone parliament. This recent condemnation aligns, like I said, with Sierra Leone's existing laws, which criminalize same-sex sexual activity between men. The Offenses Against the Person Act 1861 prohibits buggery with a maximum penalty of life imprisonment. While the law specifically criminalizes male same-sex activity, there is no legal recognition of same-sex relationships in Sierra Leone. The government stance appears to be influenced by cultural and religious factors, as I mentioned earlier, citing cultural values. Despite the legal situation, there's limited evidence of active enforcement of these laws in recent years. However, LGBTQ individuals in Sierra Leone continue to, they say, face discrimination, violence, and social stigma. So it's worth noting that Sierra Leone has previously supported international statements calling for an end to violence based on sexual orientation and gender identity, such as at the UN Human Rights Council in 2011. However, the recent parliamentary condemnation suggests a hardening of the government's position on the issue. So this recent condemnation by Sierra Leone Parliament represents a continuation and potentially an intensification of the country's existing stance against same-sex relationships and marriage. As I mentioned, it calls out specifically male same-sex relationships, and I'll give you my thoughts on why I think that is after we go through more about what the laws are on the books. But I just want to double check to see if there are any other comments or any thoughts from the audience before we move on.
I'm looking at the comments on here. So there are a few comments. I Choose Me said, we can hear you. And then Argan Bucket said, New York. I guess he's calling from New York. Hello. Mills View said, we can hear you, joining from California.
Okay, nice.
I Choose Me said, ATL, by way of Philly. My husband is from Sierra Leone. He's there right now. Monday 96 says Chicago. And then Missionary Johnny said, love is the answer.
Okay. All right, Missionary Johnny. So Cash says, are your mods feel like they may be needed, unfortunately? So we don't have moderators at this point in time, but we may potentially utilize them in the future. If you want to be a moderator, Cash, definitely email us. Our emails will be right here on the screen in just about 5 to 6 seconds, if I can find it. Here we go. There's our emails. So if you want to be a moderator, email us, and we will be more than happy to bring you on to moderate these lives for us, to help us with the comments. That'll be really helpful. And star some of the comments that you think we should be reviewing and discussing. All right. So
yes, please.
Absolutely. So we got a few folks telling us where they're from, and looks like there are a few folks who are in alignment with these laws. And so I do want to do a little bit more of a deeper dive into what laws are on the books as it's presently stated, because again, this was a statement. This wasn't specific to a law. So I want to read to you guys what the laws are on the books as far as what I've been able to find, and then give some thoughts afterwards. So again, what are the legal protections and or laws that are on the books in Sierra Leone for the LGBTQ plus individuals. So male same-sex activity, sexual activity is illegal in Sierra Leone under Section 61 of the Offenses Against Persons Act of 1861, as I mentioned before. Female same-sex sexual activity is not explicitly criminalized. I got some thoughts on that, so we'll talk about that in a second. There is no legal recognition of same-sex relationships in Sierra Leone. Same-sex marriage is banned. The Sierra Leone Constitution and laws do not protect against discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. Adoption rights are limited. Single males may not adopt children except in exceptional circumstances, and only married couples may adopt jointly. Changing one's legal gender is illegal. There are no protections against housing discrimination for LGBTQ individuals. Employment discrimination protections are ambiguous. Serving openly in the military is illegal for LGBTQ individuals. Conversion therapy is not banned. I'm not sure how often it's used, but it's not banned. Despite these legal restrictions, there is limited evidence of active enforcement of anti-LGBTQ laws in recent years. However, LGBTQ individuals in Sierra Leone continue to face what they say is significant societal discrimination, violence, and stigma. The existence of criminalizing provision impedes the exercise of rights and freedoms of LGBTQ people, even if not actively enforced, according to them. It's worth noting that in 2011, Sierra Leone was one of the 5 active African countries to join the United Nations statement calling for an end to violence and human rights violations based on sexual orientation and gender identity. However, this has not translated into concrete legal protections for these individuals within the country. I want to just jump quickly to the fact that there's nothing explicitly for same-sex relationships for women, specifically for men. Why I find that interesting is because I think those who make laws enjoy the ability to have relations with multiple women. And so you don't want to decriminalize, or you don't want to criminalize something that takes away their enjoyment. It's something
Right.
that I hear significantly about when I'm in the country, about folks who are in positions of power who definitely don't enforce that element of it. And so they do enforce they may enforce the other element, the same-sex males, but same-sex women, females, are
Right.
not enforced, which I think is interesting. So I wanted to call that part out because that to me I think was interesting, that you call out one specific group within this umbrella and not another specific group. And obviously it's I think it's for personal pleasure and gain. Well, I'd love to get your thoughts, Admire. I mean, on the condemnation in general, and also that piece that I just mentioned.
Um, I agree with you with what the point you just made. Somebody said good point. If they're going to ban men, the women should be banned as well. So I agree with that. And to the topic of the Sierra Leonean government banning gay marriage, I agree with that because I honestly would not want America or the government to enforce that in Sierra Leone or Africa in general. I don't like that. So that's my opinion on it. But yeah, I definitely agree with you.
Yeah, I think that that's it's crazy that you make specific concessions. If you feel that this is wrong in general, right? If this is your belief system, then it needs to be across the board for the umbrella term, right? You can't pick and choose what makes the most sense. And so if you're not going to enforce it for one group, or you don't even have to explicitly call it out in that group, then I think you should remove it altogether. My own
Right.
personal belief system is that having worked with and having people that I know in my family, I have a very different stance on certain things like this. And I think this happens a lot with folks who may have believed one thing at one point in time and believe something different another time. Sometimes it does take for you to love someone to understand where that person might be coming from. When I was growing up in the U.S., of course, as a Black man growing up in the United States, we always looked at this as a negative thing. And it was always seen as perverse, right? That was the idea of it. And then I started hearing stories about folks who they had a partner that was dying and they weren't allowed in the room because they weren't considered family. right? Because they weren't married, they have someone that they love, right, dying, and they don't have the ability to be there for that person while they take their last breath. And so that to me was the first time I ever considered it outside, just the idea of the marriage piece, right? Outside of what I already understood my belief system to be at that time. And I thought
Mm-hmm.
that was unfair having someone in my family that I know who happens to fall into this category, and knowing that they would not be able to be in the room if a loved one was experiencing the loss of life, however long that is, right? In most of those cases, they say family only is allowed, and they would not have been able to do that. Adoption and other things, I think, are things that followed later, but specifically that piece I thought was hugely important. And so that was the first time I ever kind of switched my thought process around this. This is probably
Mm-hmm.
about 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I stand on it, is that, the equal protection under law for specific things like that, I think is really helpful and is important. I also understand that the United States has been very big on enforcing the United States belief systems on African countries, but do not apply those same things to other countries around the world. In
Yeah.
particular, Saudi Arabia, right? I like to call out Saudi Arabia because they spend over 150, I think, $1 billion a year in arms purchases from the United States. And so, where the United States and the United Nations tends to push on specific topics, they do it in regions where um, they might be giving aid to and not generating, any real revenue from. Because as you'll notice that the United States does nothing to anything that Saudi Arabia does. You know, there's a lot of discussion about how many people who are from Saudi Arabia that were on the planes during September 11th. We didn't invade Saudi Arabia, we invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, right? Or if
Mm-hmm.
you think about the fact that United States weapons are being used to blow up school buses in Lebanon, right? In the
Right.
civil war that's happening there, and it's because we sold arms to Saudi Arabia, and then these groups are using those weapons to perpetrate these heinous acts. And then it leads all the way to this. Obviously, Saudi Arabia as well does not agree with same-sex relationships, marriage, all of that kind of stuff. And the United States does not condemn any of these acts across the board with Saudi Arabia. However, across the continent of Africa, they tend to, push buttons and try to push their own belief system. So I'm of two minds of this. Like there's that element of, the West and the United Nations pushing specific things on certain countries and not doing that with others. And that's a blanket umbrella statement across a number of different topics, including LGBTQ plus. But at the same time, as I mentioned, my belief system changed once, at least in terms of what I would hope a country would do based on uh, my experience, my life experience, and who I know to be falling under that umbrella. So that's a long way to explain where I'm coming from, but I think this is a lot of nuance, and it's important to kind of to give those details to help people understand where there are challenges. This is not just kind of a black and white issue. I think there's a lot of gray area and there's nuance, and so
Yeah.
you have to be careful when you talk about this subject too. So I just want to make sure I gave that insight and that information. Any
Right.
thoughts on that or any comments?
No, I definitely hear you, and thank you for being thorough so that way people understand you. People have been commenting while you were
Okay,
talking.
good.
Um, I'm going to read some comments. Someone said, "We have bigger things to worry about than people's bedrooms. We need to take back our resources from the Europeans and build."
100%. I agree on
And
that.
then someone said, "Why now?" I don't know what that question is
Why do they
like.
condemn it now? Maybe
Oh,
that's a good question, and I don't know because it seemed to come out of nowhere. But there must have been something that happened that made him condemn it. He must have come across something he saw on like YouTube or something, or maybe in country, because it does seem kind of random. There wasn't. Well, it was okay. Let me take that back. I think earlier this month. I think this is Pride Month, and
mm-hmm.
so I think maybe because this was during Pride Month, that's probably why that was said. I think countries around the world are recognizing it, companies around the world are recognizing it as Pride Month. And so it may have been because it was earlier this month. It may have been because it was Pride Month. So that's a good question. Good point.
Someone said, look how long it took them to ban child marriages. Um,
Yeah, true. Like 2 weeks
Someone
ago.
said, can you please pin the topic for those joining? Um,
Yeah, so she's doing that on Instagram. And for those of you who are joining elsewhere, the topic today is Sierra Leone condemning same-sex marriage. Well, specifically male
okay, let
same-sex
me do that now.
marriage. So she's doing that there. And while she's doing that, I'll read through some of the other comments that are coming in from YouTube. So Roman says a common argument I hear against same-sex relationship for Africans is that homosexuality is foreign and African people imposed on us by, I assume, Europeans and other foreign colonizers. Facts or no? It's a great question, and this is something that I hear a lot of. So there are a lot of things that people will say came from Europeans, right? And came from other places. I think that, Africa is a big continent with currently 54 countries. But obviously these are artificial borders that were put on, the continent, and there are many, many different tribes throughout the history of Africa. There are a lot of different things that happened on Africa long before the Europeans came and long after the Europeans came. There's polyamory, there's polyandry, and there are fluid relationships, as well as what many scholars would say there were some descriptions and depictions of same-sex relationships on the continent of Africa before the Europeans came. Now, the Europeans definitely put a lot in their sculptures and in their drawings, and I think that's probably why a lot of people think that did not exist on the continent of Africa before the Europeans came, but there are scholars that would argue otherwise. I am not a historical scholar. I just go on what I've seen. But this is also like the argument of Christianity, right? There are a lot of people who say Christianity was brought to Africa by the Europeans, but the oldest links to Christianity in the world can be found in Ethiopia. So there are a lot of questions about what was in Africa before the Europeans came. And I think a lot of people have a lot of opinions and thoughts, not based or rooted in fact, just based on personal feelings, right? And so that would be how I'd answer that. Any thoughts on that? Am I...
um, I can't hear you now. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, let me go to the
I
other
can hear
thing.
you, but you can't hear
I,
me.
no, I was on Instagram and the video is like different there, like the speed.
Oh yeah. It's yeah. The Instagram video is going to be behind. Yeah, it's behind. It's like 15 seconds behind. I was just asking if you had any thoughts on that. I don't know if you did.
But what the Roman? Are you talking about what Roman said?
Yeah. What Roman said.
Thoughts on that? It is foreign to a lot of African people. So them, I agree with that. Them bringing that there would be enforcing it and introducing it to certain people because it is foreign. A lot of people do not know about gay marriage and stuff back home, especially like in the villages, places where there are barely any schools. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. So to your point, yeah, I think it probably is foreign to people now. I think what their question was is, well, I guess there's two ways to look at it. Technically, right now, it could be foreign. Do we know in historical messages, it may have not have been.
right,
There
true.
are different. So what I was saying earlier, which you probably didn't hear, is that there are different scholars that say that the homosexuality was on the continent of Africa before Europeans came. Just like some people, well, actually, many people will say
I
Christianity.
don't believe that. But
Well,
then again, it could be true. It's
yeah, well,
like,
because Africa is a big continent, right? So
yeah,
to say that it didn't exist in an entire place before a group of countries that are this small versus a continent that's this big is hard to say, right?
yeah,
But I also understand that in today's world, you have a lot of people who don't have a lot of contact with a lot of outside groups, where they'll say like that's something that's never happened in their world, and if it did, it was stomped out by people, right? They had ways of dealing with that.
that's
Um,
true.
so yeah, so Ken CC says these laws negatively impact all people. Anybody who simply doesn't like you can accuse you of this. Overall, not good. I guess that's interesting too, right? There's the fact that it could be weaponized. That's a viewpoint I don't know if I've ever heard from anyone before. I don't know how often these things get weaponized, and I don't know how much it's even enforced. But that is a good point. Yeah, technically it could be weaponized. Yes. Um, Kenneth says the U.S. government is trying to exert control over these African nations. Again, yeah, I think it's interesting, right? When the U.S. and the United Nations make these assertions in Africa, but don't in other areas, right? I think that's always interesting. To me, I find that to be a double standard or contradictory, right? Where they won't say anything to Saudi Arabia. I mean, for the longest time until Mohammed bin Salman had taken over Saudi Arabia, women could not drive in Saudi Arabia. That's just, I mean,
Right.
I know that's not under the LGBTQ umbrella, but what I'm saying is, the idea of women's rights is obviously very important in the United States and in the West. And up
That's
until
true.
like about 10 years ago, women couldn't drive in Saudi Arabia. They weren't allowed to go to movie theaters. There were like limitations to their movement. And so these things I think are interesting because the U.S. would because the relationships in terms of revenue is there. They chose not to apply the same logic they do on the continent of Africa to Saudi Arabia. And I use that as an example just because it's the easiest one to call out um, because there's a direct impact on the relationship we have with Saudi Arabia and other things that the U.S. condemns, right? Um, they are exerting these similar laws in Uganda, Rwanda, and other nations that are dependent on U.S. for aid. Yep. So you're speaking my language, Kenneth. Um,
Oh wow. Somebody said Obama no do nothing for Africa, but he went to Kenya to talk about gay stuff. There's definitely an agenda. They put it all in the TV shows, music videos.
okay. That's interesting. I think Obama went to Kenya and talked about a lot of things. I think
Hmm.
that might have been one of the things he talked about. And he did increase aid to Africa, right? Now we might all disagree about whether or not we want aid and we want partnerships. But he actually did increase aid to Africa while being president, because under Bush before him, aid was decreased. Right. So,
Hmm.
there's been lists of the worst presidents for Africa. And, Bush Jr., Bush Sr., I think are both on that list. So, I mean, there's different ways you can look at it. I think yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the topics he discussed when he went to Kenya. And I think that there's probably some people that feel like that's what they would hone in on because,
Yeah.
again, what we've been talking about with Kenneth has been saying, the United States is pushing different things on the continent. So I understand that.
Hmm.
I understand that sentiment. He also said the religious right of the USA pushed these laws in African nations to satisfy their desire to control others in third world nations. I guess you would mean the religious right push which laws? I guess because definitely they wouldn't be pushing LGBTQ laws. Um, but maybe you're saying that they're pushing laws to negatively impact LGBTQ plus. Okay, maybe that's what you're saying. Okay, and he was just saying I was 100% correct. Are there any other comments in Instagram that you're seeing there that you want to call out?
Um, I do see an uptick in how it has been televised. I just think that it's because sexuality has been ramped up in the media in general and it's selling. Then he said, if somebody thief you to eat, then you give him apple, you go gladdy.
Yeah, these Sierra Leonean proverb
Right.
that I hear like
Um,
6 times to fully understand it. I don't sabi what they talk.
right. And
I
then
know they understand.
I choose me neither. You want for elaborate arguing buckets on what you mean.
I
And
understand
then
Creole, but I didn't understand what that meant.
I choose me said it's an agenda. The U.S. does nothing about it, and it's basically ulterior motives.
Oh, we lost your
But yes,
audio for a
please, now for
second.
tell me what do you mean?
Admire, you cut out for a second. We lost you for about 2, 3 seconds.
Oh, sorry, I was saying that for the person to elaborate on what he mean.
Okay, cool. Ken's CC says, agreed. I'm also in the camps. I'm also the two camps type of person. I guess basically what I was saying is, what we see with the West enforcing certain things on the continent, but also, um, autonomy and is another thing. Okay. Um, Kenneth got a lot of comments, huh? Kenneth says the
Yes,
African
thank
nations
you,
need to,
Kenneth. Shout out to
yeah.
you for engaging with us.
Absolutely. The African nations need to act like Ibrahim Traore and resist this form of outside influence. That's Kenneth's thought. Here's two more comments after this. He said the U.S. pushed these laws when they know that the people of these nations are most occupied, hoping it will fly under their radar. Okay, I got you. That's what Kenneth's saying. Roman says, a little off topic, but how does the wider continent view the Sahel states breaking from ECOWAS and cutting off their former colonial invaders like France and forming a military and economic union? I think there's some similarities with this in this overall conversation, because I think what we've been talking about is the West's influence on the continent of Africa. We're talking specifically Sierra Leone. So here's what I can tell you from people I have spoken to, right? So let me take a step back. Overall, ECOWAS is moving forward um, as normal, right? They had an ECOWAS meeting just a few weeks or days ago. And in
Mm-hmm.
that, obviously, the Sahel states had empty seats. Like you saw their country names, the flag, and their seats were empty. So it's obviously a gaping hole in this discussion. So that's Burkina Faso, that's Mali, and that's Niger, right? The three of them have created their own federation, looking to create their own country, and the president of Mali is actually going to be the head of all of that. So so they've had an economic alliance. Now, it depends on who you're talking to, determines how the rest of the continent of Africa sees this. There are those who are in Kenya, for instance, involved in a lot of these protests against the government in Kenya, and they love what they're seeing with the Sahel states. To them, they see a group in Africa finally taking back what is rightfully ours, right? I mean, removing international troops from their countries, uh, uh, taking certain industries from from private owned to public owned, like some of the mines and things like that, to really focus on ensuring that the financing that money goes back to the country. I think there are a lot of people on the ground. There's a groundswell of folks that really would like to see this happen across the continent of Africa. However, there are many leaders in Africa, especially in Kenya, in Nigeria, and other places, that are not exactly happy with that, because
Right.
they're a little worried that it could happen to them. It's not as likely, but um, you know, you notice that even though these were coups, and I'm not a big fan of coups, right? Like I'm not a big fan of people coming in and taking over government. It seems as though those people in those countries were happy that that happened and are fully in support of it. I mean, as these countries are merging and the leaders of these countries are visiting other countries, they are met with the same kind of, vigor and excitement that you would see like at a concert for a musical artist, right? It's another level of excitement that you don't normally see with heads of state across the continent of Africa. And people get excited because they want to see their president. They're going to pull out their phone and take a video. But it's different when you're screaming at the top of your lungs. And,
Right.
especially with Burkina Faso, they've actually created like a citizens watch to ensure no one attempts to overthrow the current junta that they have. This shows that people are, like citizens, are putting their lives on the line to protect him, Ibrahim Traore specifically, to ensure that he maintains, status quo and builds the country and moves it forward. So it's a long way to answer your question, but I think that it does. It's a little off topic, but I think it applies, because I think this same thing is how people are looking at the continent of Africa as people on the ground. They don't like to see the West imposing belief systems, beyond LGBTQ, but other things, and then
Mm-hmm.
also benefiting financially from our continent. So that's
Right.
what I'll say there. Any thoughts on that, or any other questions or comments from folks?
On the same guy who would say the Sierra Leonean saying, he
Mm-hmm.
said, if I take a tree from your backyard, then offer you an apple, will you be happy that I'm giving you your own apple? All
Oh,
the
okay.
aid that Obama sent was for him to build military bases, and all places that he built them had coops.
Heku's, yeah. Yeah, true. I mean, well, not necessarily, but places where there are bases had coups. Because remember, there are many American bases all over the continent of Africa, not just in the places where there were coups. But yes, I do agree that that when the United States does anything, including that particular president, Barack Obama, it is going to be um, with the United States in mind.
Right.
All countries operate when they do deals with other countries, right? It's always going to be with their own personal gain in mind. So
Exactly.
that makes sense. Yes. Um, okay. So there were some other comments too. So Tim Black, gay marriage or parades, but criminalized for being is kind of wrong. He also says what adults do behind closed doors is nobody's business. I think that I agree with the second one. The first one, I'm not too sure about. I think every country should make their own decisions. But um, I would like to see equal protections. But of course, I understand that people feel like equal protections means a slippery slope, and people have a lot of issues with all the other elements that come along with LGBTQ. And so I think each country is going to make their own decisions based on their cultural beliefs and values.
Right.
But there are a lot of cultural beliefs and values in a lot of countries that, like child marriage, that was allowed until just recently. So I think we kind of
Right.
have to reevaluate everything. That's my thought process.
Yep.
Um,
Agree.
anybody else or anything else? I have a bunch of comments here.
No, from my side, the last person was that comment I just read. But thank you guys. I choose me. Thank you so much because I've been seeing you comment a lot. Argan
Yeah,
Buckets, thank you so much. You have also been commenting a lot. We appreciate you guys for engaging with us and
absolutely.
being a part of the conversation.
Absolutely. So Ken CC says the Western influence also comes in the form of religious cults, especially the missionaries and these adoption agencies that steal African children and place them in white homes. I'm not sure they're stealing them. I mean, look, I listen. I'm not an apologist. I am just practical. So I'm reading your comment here, and I understand what you're saying, but and I do get it. There's the white savior complex. I think people talk about a lot, especially when it comes to people of European descent coming to the continent of Africa. Sometimes it's really disrespectful. I posted a video on the Instagram page of this woman passing out like one slice of bread to each person, reach each kid, or when you think of Donald Trump flicking over the paper towel rolls. There are different moments, right, in history when you see these things and you think to yourself, they see themselves as superior to us. But I think you also have to remember there is some blame to go around for the government of Africa too, because they're allowing this,
Right.
right? So it is not like they're just coming in there without like they're not allowed to come in there. It's being requested of them and encouraged. So I think we have to kind of also remember that if there's anything that you want to see differently, it's going to have to be done by the leadership on the continent of Africa. So, and then this idea of the adoption agency stealing African children, I think in a lot of cases, these people are giving away their children because they cannot take care of them, right? And so, I mean, I'm sure that there are some of the nefarious behavior you're discussing here that's happening, but in large part, many people are looking for that kind of a savior to come take their children away because they cannot take care of them. So
Right.
there's also that too, and we should talk about the conditions in those countries that lead people to want to do that.
To want to do that, yeah.
You know, any other thoughts on
Um,
that?
I definitely agree. I choose me said it is other people's problems when said people are being deceitful and not informing their other partners. Imprisonment is too serious as a culture and we condemn them and socially, but to imprison them is unjust.
Okay, that is a fair viewpoint. Um, So there was a question that comes up, which I had mentioned earlier. What about the women? The law should be applied to them as well. The law makes me proud of Sierra Leone. Um, so yeah, the question is, what about the women, right? I think that was interesting, right? When they call out males, but again, I don't think there's going to be a call out for the women, maybe in marriage, but I think, like I said, there are folks that are in power, and I'm not saying this particular administration or anybody in particular. It's very clear. But what I'm saying is there are many times across the continent, across the world, where there are people in power who enjoy the company of two women, and so that would then make them criminal if they were to be engaging in that behavior. And so it's very unlikely that those folks who are the ones making the laws are going to do anything that would make their acts criminal. So
Right.
keep that in mind.
Agreed.
Kenneth says, not sure if you noticed, but most of these laws that get pushed from the collective West happen in English-speaking African nations. Sierra Leone, Uganda, Kenya have large English-speaking populations. That's interesting. I don't know and so to be clear too, I'm not sure there's any laws that have been pushed as well. There are notes of condemnation. There are folks who, when in countries, make mention of things. But technically, no country can introduce laws except for the international, laws around genocide, etc. Those things are like agreed upon internationally. But I haven't seen anywhere where they introduce any new laws or legislation in a new country. I think that people have definitely talked about these things, but to be clear, I don't know if there's any laws that have been pushed. So I do want to make that distinction because I think that's important. Okay, there's one last comment here. I say, I'm curious what the people's reaction is to these decisions. Do they accept it? Do they condemn this? Is this seen as an issue only among the LGBTQ plus members, or is it something people across the sexual spectrum? So that's a great question. I have a friend who works in sexual health and education, and also outside of that does like sexual pleasure stuff, right? And she is not in the LGBTQ plus spectrum, but she is of a certain mid 30s, mid to late 30s, and she obviously condemns the idea of this kind of a law. I think there's a growing contingent of young people who condemn this kind of law, but in general, those who are pretty religious tend to agree with the folks who tend to be older as well, because definitely the people who are older, just like older Americans who agree with this kind of a law. It applies in Sierra Leone and in the countries I've been in. But I would
Yeah.
say that I've seen younger people in Sierra Leone be more open to the idea of more rights to a minority group like this. And so I think that there's, it depends on the group. But like I said, I think it's a growing contingent, but it tends to be a younger contingent of folks. And so that's what I've seen.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people have different opinions. There's a number of people, like you said, a number of people who agree with the law in Sierra Leone, and there's a number who doesn't. Um,
Are there any other comments? That was the last comment on YouTube.
okay. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. Everybody has different opinions. By the way, when you're talking, I hear you talk, but you freeze like the video. I don't know if you guys see it in on the live as well. When he's talking, he freezes.
I think that might be your connection
Oh,
because I'm watching on two different devices,
and
and
it's fine.
yeah, it's fine on my phone. On my laptop, it's
Oh,
slow, and my laptop is slow. My phone has a better connection. But
yeah.
if you guys are seeing that though, let us know because that'll be helpful, and I'll have to try to use a different connection. I come to America, and my internet connectivity has not improved. Like people used to be like, "Oh, I can tell you're in the U.S. now." Yep,
Okay,
they can't.
Mills View said yes, he was frozen on my end.
Okay,
Hmm.
well there you go. So my apologies for that. Okay, so it is me. because Roman is saying the quality of my camera is not so great, which is interesting. Because
I
on my
know.
phone it looks normal, but like on my laptop it doesn't. I thought it was my laptop, so the quality is pretty bad. I'm actually seeing that now, so I apologize for that, guys. Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can connect to another network.
But yeah, thank you so much, guys. Mill's View, I know you just got here. Let us know what your thoughts are on Sierra Leonean government condemning gay marriage. For those of you that are watching now or just tuned in as well, let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Um, Somebody else said yes, he was frozen, but the audio is fine though. Thank you
Okay,
guys for letting us know.
thank you.
Joe's
So
quality is known, but admires is fine.
yeah, so I was wrong. It was me, not you. So sorry guys. I apologize for that. At least you can hear my voice, so that's important. We'll have to work on the quality camera because I do see it. It is pretty bad. I'm using my phone to do this call, so for whatever reason my laptop wasn't showing up. Hinga also says something here. I thought, which is interesting. Hinga says the younger people are poisoned by Western social media.
I agree with this 1,000%. I'm sorry to cut you
so
off,
so that's
but I
hey,
really do.
that's your opinion. I was just trying to get the comment up on the screen. There you go. I'm frustrated by the internet. That had nothing to do with your statement. Okay. So that's Admire's opinion. Yeah, I definitely think social media has an impact on people's behaviors and lives. I
Yeah,
think that could be a positive or a negative thing. I do think most of the time it is negative, not even specifically on this topic. When it comes to this topic, I do think it's one of those where it's a very sensitive topic, right? Because it tends to be one where the more religious you are, you tend to be more against these ideas. And so what's happening, I think, around the world is that you have certain religious sects that are losing folks, and then you have some that are increasing. But those who are losing folks tend to be the groups in the West where folks aren't as used to going to church as often. They're not utilizing church in their own personal day to day. And so I think in those cases, you have people who have different belief systems. But I think there
right,
are people who might be leaving the church because they fall into these groups and they feel like they're not represented. So you kind of get like this cyclical process, where you have a little bit of both happening. But yeah, I think social media in general, I'd like to say that it had an overall benefit to society, but there are a lot of negatives. And so I
yeah,
think some people would say both sides of this topic, social media has increased knowledge or anger on either side. So that's what I would say to
agreed.
social media.
Yeah,
Um, so Kenneth says the collective West disguised their intentions by calling it influence, but they pushed the country's local politicians to pass laws. Okay. Hinga says no LGBT propaganda should be allowed in the country through the media, internet, or otherwise. That's interesting. Um, that's an interesting comment or statement. I think there's also the question of whether, and this comes back to the question of whether or not people believe that this is a choice or if you're born
hmm,
that way. I think what happens a lot of time is if people think it's a choice, then they feel like you're choosing to do this. And so um, where other people who might believe that you're born that way might think that it would be unfair to you to not have any representation, right? Because we are born with race, and we all say with our own particular races that we should have representation in media and other places. And so we're not choosing our race, right? We're born with this. And if we don't see the representation of ourselves in these places, it does limit a lot of times what we think we can do. And
right,
so in the world of LGBTQ, I think their argument is the representation matters for them as well. And many of them would say that they're born that way, right? So it's not like they chose that lifestyle. And so they feel like representation should happen. I know there are a lot of people who feel like there's an agenda and all those other things. So I just want to give you guys their argument so you guys could hear that. Um, all right. There was Tori, Trey Guri, sorry for mispronouncing your name, said we shouldn't imprison them. We should pray for them. Banning abortion doesn't stop people from doing it. This law doesn't stop people from being gay. I'm against the promotion of it, but it's not a crime. That's interesting. So he used abortion as the equivalency here. Yeah, I mean, look, the conversation about abortion, and I think this is a completely different topic, and that's also a very deep one. So I don't know if we want to spend too much time on this, but the argument that I think you're making is an interesting one because people do operate in the illegal and when it's illegal, and there are many more deaths, and it's way more harmful to those folks when they do it in worlds where abortion is illegal. It's a little bit different because what's a lot of it different, right? Because we're talking about something with abortion that is specific to, in many cases, life or death for those who are performing it for their own health, right? I don't think we're talking about that in the same way when we're talking about
Yeah, that's a
LGBTQ.
different topic, definitely.
Yeah, so I don't know if you could use that as an equivalency. I understand what you're trying to say, but when people are performing abortion, when it's illegal, they're dying. Not when people are performing same-sex relationships in places where it's illegal, they're not necessarily dying just by performing it, right? I think so. I think it's kind of a false equivalency. I see where you're trying to go, but I think it's a kind of a false equivalency.
Yeah.
Tim Black says, I'm unclear in Sierra Leone doing like Ghana and criminalizing being gay, or is it just no gay marriage? Technically, good question, Tim. So there are laws on the books against same-sex males, which would then include marriage, right? The statement was speaking specifically to marriage, though, from the Speaker of the Parliament. But there isn't a law that calls out marriage, but there's a law that calls out same-sex relationships, would also include marriage. I would imagine, in fact, I would not imagine, I know that they do not perform same-sex marriage in America, so you can't get a marriage certificate if it's same-sex. Sorry, not America, in Sierra Leone. Did I say America? I meant Sierra Leone.
Yeah, you did.
I'm in Sierra Leone. I'm in America right now, so that happens.
How do we get questions on the
A lot more
screen?
comments. Do you have some comments you want to read before I go?
Somebody who is Big Africa said, "How do we get our comments on the screen?" You get it on the screen when you comment on the YouTube, under the YouTube live. So go on YouTube, Authentic African.
Or Sierra Leone's Killing It.
Or Sierra Leone's Killing It, yeah. And then you see. So feel free to comment on the YouTube page as well. Thank you guys for engaging with your opinions. Thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate you guys so much.
Absolutely. Yeah. And unfortunately, Instagram doesn't allow for commenting to go on the screen on third-party platforms. And we're using a third-party platform to go live across a bunch of different places. So that is the reason why you're unable to see your comments on the screen on Instagram. But again, as Admire said, just go over to the YouTube channel, either one, Sierra Leone's Killing It or Authentic African on YouTube. And from there, you'll be able to just click on the live. The most recent video will be a live video. You'll see it there and you'll be able to comment directly. Yeah. All right. Any other comments or questions? I have a few more here.
No, on my end, no. Go ahead.
Okay. So Roman says, speaking as an African in Western nation, the persecution of the non-heterosexual people is wrong no matter what color you are. I'm reminded of men like James Baldwin who cared deeply for his people. Okay, yeah, so I guess James Baldwin, I'm not sure if he was out, but I think most people agree that they think he was homosexual, and he was obviously a very well-spoken, outspoken author and I would say activist for people of color, Black people of color in America, and one of the greats, right? So regardless of his sexual orientation, he was known as that. So I guess, yeah, I hear your point, Roman. Sick Lion says, is homosexuality the only sin in the world? We should criminalize polygamy too. Oh.
Right, okay. But that's the thing about these governments. They're gonna do, like Joe said earlier, they have an agenda. They're doing certain things and not doing certain things. They're gonna do what they want to do, pick and choose.
Yeah, it can't. They're not going to pick anything that's going to negatively impact them now.
Exactly.
That, that's that's what you can't expect. But I understand what you're saying, though. I agree. I think if all of this stuff is deemed sin, then you have to kind of do all of it. You can't do some of it, right?
Right.
I disagree with the idea of any of it being deemed illegal, but I do believe that there should be parity across all of it if you're going to say one of these things are wrong. But yeah,
Right.
Tim says they are criminalizing being gay amongst men mostly. Yes, that's what Roman was saying to Tim Black. Okay, a bunch more comments in here. Hinga says, look at what is happening in America. Once you go down that rabbit hole, transgender will be next. Nip this in the bud, I guess is what they're trying to say. Well, that's your opinion, and I think you share the opinion of many people. I think there are people who agree with you on that.
Yeah.
I'll
Thank
leave
you
that.
for your feedbacks.
I'll leave that right there. Okay, so he said he's glad they took care of it. Tim Black says, so homosexuality didn't exist in Africa before the Europeans and the Arabs came to the continent. I think that's what I was saying. I think that there are historians that would say otherwise. But there are also people who think that those historians are making it up, right? I mean, it's a tough, right? It's tough because we weren't all there, right?
Right. So
But
we
I
don't
think,
really know. Ain't no telling.
yeah, I do think though, and we don't really understand hieroglyphs. Oh, my internet connection just went out. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, on my screen it looked like everything just went out. Okay, cool. So I think I have to double check on the hieroglyphs, but I'm pretty sure I've seen hieroglyphs that depict same-sex relationships, even though we don't know how to read them. And that's Egypt only. But most of our history obviously has been wiped out by Europeans. Every library we've had, many of the libraries we've had when the Europeans came, they burned a lot of books. They got rid of a lot of things. So it's tough to know what was happening on the continent of Africa pre-European colonization. But there are scholars that say otherwise. Oh, I just got kicked out of StreamYard. You can still see me and hear me though, right?
Yes.
Okay. Um, my internet is just going through it right now. My apologies, guys. We are 10 minutes over our normal live time, so we're gonna take a couple more comments. Obviously, this is an engaging one, so we appreciate you
Yeah.
guys,
Thank you guys so much.
yeah, joining in the conversation for sure. This has been a lively discussion so
Yes, it
far.
has.
And some people would say this is a third real topic. Most people won't talk about these kinds of things. I think for us, we think it's important that we bring to you what's happening in Sierra Leone,
Yes.
our viewpoints, and we want to hear from you guys. I mean, the idea of these platforms is to share our common experience and to learn more about what's happening in our country. And so we appreciate all of you for coming in and giving your thoughts.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Quadwo. I always pronounce this name wrong. I'm sorry. It's one of those Ghanaian names. Is this okay? How do you say it?
I think it's Quador K.
Okay. So I'm gonna leave that to you, Admire. You did a really good job on that. Says, does anyone think this law is just political smokescreen to take attention away from things that truly matter, like healthcare, building a proper infrastructure? Also, how enforceable is this law? Good question. So just taking a step back, to be very clear, this wasn't a law. This was a condemnation by the parliament speaker. There are laws on the books that I read through earlier, but this specifically was just a statement that said people who do it and get married will be dealt with accordingly. So wasn't necessarily a law. Trey Guri says, Quado, I agree. Oh, but to speak to that, how do I say this? So in a lot of cases around the world in politics, I'm not specifically speaking about Sierra Leone, smoke screens are used, right? A lot of countries do things where they'll make statements that they know that the majority or many of the country agree with to distract from other things that are happening. I'm not
Yes.
saying that's what happened here. That does happen. right? So it's like sleight of hand. Watch this so you don't see what I'm doing in this, right? Like I'm doing all kinds of other stuff with this. Well, watch this. So yeah, I agree that happens. I'm not saying that's what happened here, but that does happen around the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that.
I choose me said they're trying to wipe people of color out of history, period. They're still doing it.
Okay. I do think we deserve to be here. That's for sure. But that's
Yes.
one of the things people say is the agenda, right? I would say though, in the numbers, there are many more folks of European descent that fall into these categories than people of African descent. So, if anything, it'd be wanting to wipe out the whole population of the world by doing this. If that was what the case was, it wouldn't just be our people. So, if that's your thought process and your theory, it probably would be you'd have to be looking at it as a global thing. But that would be my thought process on that. Rudy says gay people deserve the right to live life to their fullest, just as heterosexual people. Discrimination whatsoever based on identity should not be condoned. There's Rudy's thoughts. Roman says, I'd like to hear Maya's opinion on this a bit more. It seems like she's against Western values being promoted in this case, but I don't know. Do you have anything more you want to add based on that?
No, so I don't know if he was here in the beginning, but basically, I agree with with Sierra Leone government banning gay marriages because I feel like it shouldn't be enforced in Sierra Leone or even other parts of Africa. I don't know if that answers your question. Like that's just shortcut, like how I feel about it.
Straight to the point.
Let me know in the comments if I answered your question.
Cool.
And burning the history books and stuff. Oh, I choose me said he was talking about them burning the history books and stuff, them trying to wipe us out or wiping us out. Yeah.
Got it. Appreciate the context.
Thank you for clarifying yourself.
Thank you. Yes. Hinga says, this is a great question because earlier there was a conversation about polygamy. He said, how do you put polygamy and homosexuality in the same boat? Polygamy still involves a man and a woman. I think what they were trying to say is if one is a sin and the other is a sin, and remember, according to the religious values of folks who are actually saying all of this, all sins are the same, right? There aren't degrees to sinning, right? So if it is a sin, even if you might agree with one and disagree with the other, right? If they're both sins, they should technically both be. But let's go more specifically to this law because you may look at polygamy and homosexuality as completely different things, which is obviously your prerogative. The specific law actually calls out male homosexuality and not female homosexuality. So I think if we want to talk about the two different groupings and being treated differently, it would be those two groups, right? And how they should be looked at as the same. But again, we spoke earlier, whether it's polygamy or with women, I think it benefits those who tend to make those decisions mainly.
Right. Yep, they pick and choose.
So Hinga says they have the right to live the way they want, just not Sierra Leone or anywhere else in Africa. Okay, well there you go. Rudy says to Hinga, you do not speak for all Africans. Some gay people are Africans. Get over it. All right, let's not devolve into that. Hinga says it does not always have to do with religion. It doesn't. It doesn't always have to do with religion. You're right.
Yeah, it doesn't always have to do with it.
You're right. I made a statement a little earlier speaking to the religious element and aspect, and because I think in this case that is what was utilized to be part of the condemning was religious practices, right. And also cultural practices. Okay, so with that, I think we're gonna bring this to a close. We've been on over an hour. Has been a fruitful discussion, a lot of great conversation. I apologize for my picture being unclear, and freezing a bunch of times, but I'm glad you were able to hear me. Before we go, any final thoughts from you and Maya?
No.
No?
Nope.
Okay. I think we've exhausted this topic for today. I'll just say in closing remarks that number one, I think that as I said previously, I think that you can't pick and choose, right? I think if you're gonna have this belief system about specific things, it should be across the board. But I also disagree with the fact that all of it should be condemned. So those are my thoughts. And I think we can all have different thoughts and have a civil discussion and talk about it. I
Right.
think that's also an
Everybody's
important thing.
entitled. Yeah, everyone's entitled to their opinions. Thank you guys. We can all agree to disagree, but thank you guys so much for all your opinions, for tuning in, for talking with us, for engaging. We really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is a tough topic to talk about for
It
sure.
is. Yeah.
It's one of those that, like I said, is a third rail topic for many people. But I think it was important for us as a group to have this conversation because it's one of those that I don't think is had in a nuanced way. It's just either one side or the other, and it devolves into what I see the comments happening here.
Right.
And we want to keep this as a conversation. We can agree to disagree, as Maya said, and we can civilly disagree. I think that's important. So with that, we want to thank you guys all for watching. If you haven't already, follow Sierra Leoneans Killing It across all the platforms. Just search, you'll find it. And follow Authentic African as well. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Sierra Leoneans Killing It. We need more of you guys who watch these lives on Instagram to go over to YouTube and subscribe on YouTube. And I would say the same thing with Authentic African. If you follow the platform on Instagram, we do want you to come over to YouTube and subscribe. And if you do, while we are live, your comments will be seen on the screen. So with that,
Yes, definitely.
so with that, thanks for watching, and we will see you all on the next video.
Yes, sir.